your victory is hail, Broadway, hail.
In the can.
Yay!
Good. They had pride in the school. They really did have pride in the school.
It's pride. It's pride.
Well, we were very proud.
We're proud of our education and our friends from Broadway.
They're very proud of Broadway High School.
It gives me a tremendous feeling inside that I can only express one more. It's when I stood at attention in Germany in the Army and the flag was being raised up. The same feeling.
They said it was just a glorious time.
To me, they struck me as being such a cohesive group. You know, it's like they looked out after each other. They cared about each other.
There were some rich people whose kids came to Broadway and some poor ones.
My father would come home at the end of the week with maybe making $2 or so. I made enough money to buy shoes.
We lived through a lot. We lived through the Depression. Yes, we lived through the Depression.
So it was actually at one time a very multi-ethnic school.
But they didn't look upon me as an immigrant kid or something. It was just another guy who could play soccer or kick the can.
I thought it was a good place to learn. Good experience.
I kind of probably slid out of Broadway by the seat of my pants.
I think I got a good education, a lot of good teachers.
Home economics, I had 4 years of food and 3 years of clothing. And excellent teachers.
What does clothing mean?
We sewed. We created.
We had one teacher that chemistry teacher was Tony Bell, and his son was an announcer of athletics here in Seattle. And Tony was a great guy, and one day we decided, he had on a dark suit, and he went out of the room for a minute and two. We put chalk on the chair when he sat down on a blue suit. Everybody just roared, you know, and he didn't know what was going on.
It was the height of the big band era, and I was a pretty good smooth dancer. I wasn't a jitterbug, but anyway, I think a lot of girls danced with me because I was a good dancer, not that I was the most handsome guy in town. I always had fun at the mixers, and we had them in the gym.
And they certainly had active theater in the school, and they had a very active choral group, and they had a newspaper.
We had things like White Clothes Day. Another thing that we had to do was wear middies and navy blue skirts.
There are pictures of all of us in our middies and skirts.
And on Friday, we get to wear whatever we wanted.
First of all, it was the first school in Seattle.
It was the original high school in Seattle.
It's the first singular structure, and a huge one, given to the high school education for the kids of Seattle. And they had to come from a long ways to get there. They came across Lake Washington, some of them. They had to take tortuous routes of transportation that would make modern commuters sort of blush at how easy it is for them. They rode horses and jumped in canoes and, you know, and stepped ankle deep in puddles to get to that school.
Broadway High. Before Ballard and Roosevelt, before Garfield, and any of the high schools around today in Seattle, there was just one, Broadway High School. And when you begin asking the alumni about their alma mater, it's clear those days were special times in their lives. Broadway was a special place.
I grew to love the school as much as anybody that had gone there.
So the best thing about the high school for you?
Just a great education. Quite literally. It was an excellent education.
Patsy was an officer in the girls' club.
Yes.
That's why she was in her, upper. I had to look up to her.
This was heaven on earth. They just loved the school.
But Broadway High had that kind of elan, that vitality that proved itself with a great alumni group that kept the school going for many years after it closed.
At the very beginning, Broadway High was actually called Seattle High School.
It was the only high school. The other school that was in Seattle was a combination of a primary school and secondary school.
Seattle High became Washington High in 1906.
Which became confused with the UW, particularly around football time. So then it became the Broadway High School.
For obvious reasons.
Well, it was on Broadway.
But some called it something else because of how it looked.
It was sandstone brick, and they used to call it the Pine Street Prison because prisons were made that way.
Those sandstone blocks, I thought it had character rather than the prison types of buildings.
The students at Garfield called Broadway the prison. And I would get up every morning and my sister would start in on me that you got to go to the prison and I'm going to school.
So the beginning was when?
Oh, 1902.
First graduating class?
1904.
Last graduating class?
1946. And the last student going across, his picture is up in the archives room, and he misbehaved in some way. He was late or something for practice. So Mr. Pfaff, who was principal, made him be the last one across the stage. So now he is renowned. He's the last one to graduate from Broadway.
Why did they put the school where it was? Well, probably because it was close to Pike Street. It was possible to get there for students coming from all over to go to the first big high school, to take the trolley up Pike Street, take it down Broadway.
Frances Terry
46 was when I graduated.
Was in that last graduating class.
And when they closed Broadway, that was a big shock.
It was just a matter of a couple of weeks prior to our actual graduation date, which was chiseled into stone. And the word or the news came out that Broadway was being discontinued.
I cried. I think everybody cried when they closed the school.
Closed for almost 7 decades now.
And how about you? What year did you graduate?
46.
46? I was in the class of 36.
For this lovely event, we're happy that you folks are here to take my picture.
There aren't many alumni left.
I counted the master list, 1,241. A few have died since then, but I keep the master list too. And check for obituaries, and each morning is the first thing I do is check for obituaries and check people off.
When was the last one you lost?
I just got something through the mail yesterday.
The group continues to shrink. It's never going to increase. It's always going to shrink in size. But, you know, God bless the ones with the vitality and the energy and the insight, their sense of humor. I just can't help but love them. You know, I mean,
Those still with us have stayed connected
Things. We have everybody named that's coming today.
through their Broadway High reunions.
They're a little older than last time I saw them, but
It really had great alumni.
We're going to sing our alma mater song.
So that would be perhaps the most important quality that goes into making its heritage significant through time. And
the people who went there.
The people who went there.
I do have a loyalty that I am amazed that people still show up.
Was it fun today?
Yeah, it was always fun.
Nothing's more important than being here. I wouldn't go in, no matter what it was, even a wedding. I think I'd go here first, because this is what I live for. These people.
Well, we've been around a long time.
Dick Wood has been around longer than anybody. He's 99 now, the oldest living alumnus from Broadway High School, class of 32. There he is in the yearbook. Look at him now, thinking back to those good old days.
As old Archie Bunker would say, those were the good old days. Man alive.
It's tough to justify spending time on the past, except that it's really crazy not to, because it's our foundation. Having some depth of feeling for what was here before we are really makes this place, this community, resonate the better for us, and we gain from it.
In many ways, life was simpler back then.
We didn't have distractions. You went out and played games growing up outside. You didn't have television. You might listen to the radio.
They formed friendships that were meaningful to them, and so many of them, I think, the ones that stayed in Seattle, retained those friendships. And I think it was a sense of a community.
We had mixers, we had school dances, we were social, there's no question about it.
Phil Flash did theater his senior year. He still enjoys performing, as you'll see.
It was a love story. It was a broad brick moonlit neck to neck if you're all right in your head. It's a Roman and the glowman with my bunny by my side. It's a Roman and the glowman when the sun begins to rise. Aye, but when the sun has gone to rest, that's the time that I love best. Oh, it's lovely, Roman and the glowman.
I think Broadway has to go down as probably one of the most important high schools in Seattle in its entire history of the Seattle Public Schools. And I think it has to do with, one, its location, being here right in the kind of the heart of where the Founding Fathers lived.
Everybody important in the 20s from Seattle went to Broadway High School.
Nobel Prize winner for economics, Dr. George Stigler, class of 27. 4 years earlier, 1923, Elmer Nordstrom graduated from Broadway. He was one of the three Nordstrom brothers who owned Nordstrom's shoe stores. Kenneth Fisher was a year behind Nordstrom, class of 24. Fisher of the Fisher Flowering Mills and Como Television.
Writers and Pulitzer Prize and you name it, we've had it.
Congressman from Oregon, the late Brock Adams, class of 44. Adams was president of his class, president of the Honor Society.
I worked with his mother as a realtor. And it's interesting, at Weston Wheeler, it was called. And she was the mother of Brock Adams, and she was actually the most meanest, difficult person I thought I ever met. And I thought, I'm going to break that down. So every day I'd come in, I said, good morning, how are you, with enthusiasm. And you know, after doing that for a while, she was the most wonderful person in the world, and she loved me, and I loved her more than anybody in the place. But I thought I was going to break her down.
It had a wonderfully distinguished student body that you can still trace, especially now that we have Google. You'll find a lot of these people that graduated from the school as being very significant people in the culture of the city and even worldwide culture.
The alumni made contributions in many areas, especially the arts. There was acclaimed sculptor George Tsutakawa, class of '32. Louis Garfinkel, who wrote the story for the Oscar-winning movie Deer Hunter. Morton Lockman, class of '35, was a writer and producer for Bob Hope and produced 11 Academy Awards shows and 6 Grammy shows. One of Broadway High's alumni headed one of the film studios.
His name was Arthur Freed, and he was the editor. Arthur Freed went on to head MGM.
Arthur Freed brought Fred Astaire to MGM. Early in his career, Freed was associate producer of the Oscar-nominated movie The Wizard of Oz, which lost to the epic American classic Gone with the Wind that year, 1939.
And he was a graduate.
So was acclaimed photographer Imogen Cunningham, class of 1903.
Imogene Cunningham became a very famous photographer. She did some photography in the Southwest, and she's very noted.
And then there's Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Edwin Guthman. Guthman served as press secretary for Robert Kennedy and later became the national editor at the Los Angeles Times. Another reason for their pride.
Some of the people that went to Broadway were really smart cookies. There were a lot of Japanese and Chinese people that went to Broadway that were brilliant people. And for example, Horiyuchi was a friend of mine. There's Horiyuchi's screen there.
At one time in its history, in the early 40s.
30% of the population there, or the enrollment there, was Japanese Americans.
Some of them, after school, went to Japanese language schools.
All these people went to Broadway, and we became, good friends.
Louise Cascino and Patsy Love were good friends then, best of friends now.
Patsy Love is my friend that I always remember. And she was my friend all the way through, so she even came to the Puyallup Fairgrounds where we were incarcerated. And as I think about it now, that was a long ways for her to come.
We were always friends. I would say that when Pearl Harbor came, we didn't think it was right that Louise would have to go to, all of the kids would have to go to camp. I wrote a letter to my husband-to-be. This is a letter to Hal, and I don't know if you knew him. It was later you met him. Dear Hal, yes, a war was declared this morning, and I feel kind of morbid. There are quite a few Japanese kids at school you knew, and I noticed no hard feelings as yet. We talked to them about it too, and some said their parents were very surprised and disgusted about the situation.
No question. No question about it in terms of during that time period, Japanese Americans were looked at as the enemy. Nobody was saying that whether Japanese Americans that were born here, there's a difference between them and those that are in Japan.
True?
Yeah. My father, I remember him putting up a sign in the front window of our grocery store saying, "We are Americans."
One person told me that there was a mother's tea for students, and this young woman, who was a Japanese, she was one of the top students in the class. They refused to let her mother come to the tea.
And this is the sad part, because government should have been the ones that were the voice of reason. They should have been the ones protecting its citizens.
Memory is vivid for me.
For everyone. May 14th, 1942.
When they were shipped out to what amounts to concentration camps.
They got to go. Why? That was a shock to myself, at any rate. I'm sure it was also to my remaining Anglo classmates, non-Japanese classmates.
So one day you go to school,
and no one's there in our classes.
We piled what we could carry, and we had to report to 14th and Jefferson.
All of a sudden, 1/3 of the school was gone.
Stuart Oles remembers how he felt coming to school that day.
Absolutely, and deeply resenting it. And we felt, as I still do, that it was a terrible mistake.
Just outside, we're supposed to meet on that corner, on that block.
And then what?
The bus came and
took
took us away, yeah.
They were shipped down to Puyallup in a camp.
They were gone, and there were no kids in classes, and there was no choir, no Japanese choir, and part of the orchestra was gone.
They missed, therefore, their graduation ceremonies, and our good faculty trooped down to Puyallup and held a graduation ceremony for them.
One day my mom was crying, and so I was looking at her, wondering why she cried, because she very seldom shed tears. And she said that she felt so bad for me that I couldn't go to the prom, graduation and the prom. Something little like that. But I think she was just saying that because she didn't want to express what the harm that it has been done to them.
Patsy visited her dear friend Louise at the Puyallup Fairgrounds.
Louise remembered that I had a camera. I wanted to take a picture of her.
The soldiers took the cameras away from her during our visit. But I was called to the front office, and so that's when I saw Patsy. She must have been kind of appalled to see the kind of conditions we were in.
From Puyallup, many of the families were forced into internment camps in other parts of the country for the next 2.5 years. Al Sugiyama's parents graduated from Broadway High. That's Harry Sugiyama, class of '32, and Teiko Nagai, class of '36. They'd already graduated when the family was rounded up and forced into the internment camps.
There was barbed wires all around. There was all the soldiers out there with the guns pointing. You couldn't leave. And there was cases where an individual walked away, one of the persons that they knew, and, you know, he was hard of hearing, he was elderly, and when he started walking out, they shot and killed him. So they said it wasn't a fun time. It was strictly a racist issue that they were taken because they looked like the enemy.
This is obviously before you were born.
Right. Well, first of all, my oldest sister died in camp, and when she was first born. The conditions were so bad, my mom talked about. So the baby died after she was born, just a few days later. And so that was a real sad time, and they were quite angry. My dad was saying how angry he was because he knew that the baby would have lived had it not been for the conditions.
There were many of us who felt exactly the same way. This is not right. This is unfair. Well, so be it. It happened anyway, like things often do. And couldn't do a thing about it.
1/3 of the school was gone, and one quick swoop. And that is what led to the demise, really, of Broadway High School.
Many other students left Broadway High to enlist.
He dated some, and they went off to the service, and some of them didn't come back.
But that seemed to be, among a few of us, the in thing to do is to join the National Guard, and which I did. I had received word from home that my friend Dave Witt, who had been in the Air Corps at the time, the Air Force, but he had been a gunner and had been shot down in the South Pacific. Well, that encouraged me to do this, and in a matter of weeks I was gone and on a whole new mission with the B-17. Flying an airplane, it can go 400 miles an hour. All of a sudden, we're hearing fighters in the area, you know, and then all of a sudden, they're there.
Yeah.
But that has nothing to do with Broadway High School, does it?
No, but that's all right.
The dramatic drop in the school population led to a Seattle Public Schools decision no one at Broadway High liked.
It hurt.
And the school closed as a high school, in 1946.
Well, I was upset over the fact that it was sort of done behind everybody's back. I mean, they gave them 1 month's notice. May, they told them, it's going to close after this graduating class. That was it. It was Seattle School District. And we were small.
Joel Buxbaum had to find another high school. It would be Lincoln High for his senior year.
It was a shock to us who had another year or two to go. When I heard about it, it was a tearjerker because a lot of the kids, and particularly the girls, they were so upset they were crying.
And they figured that this would be a good place for all of the returning vets to come back and take more education.
Edison Technical School, which already had a building down the street from Broadway High, took over the facility. It was the perfect place for veterans who came back from the war, who were too old to return to their high schools and needed a degree and a technical skill.
So they wanted to have vocational studies there. Night classes were a big deal in that institution for a long time, and I think the size of the night teaching there was even greater than the size of the high school population.
Hugh Russell never finished Ballard High School, so this was a way for you to get your high school equivalents?
Oh yeah, get all that stuff done.
By going to Edison?
Yeah.
20 years later, Edison became Seattle Community College in 1966. And then 4 years later, in 1970, changed its name to Seattle Central Community College. And 44 years later, in March of 2014, another name change. It's Seattle Central College now. The college that was voted Time Magazine College of the Year in 2001.
Oh, the magazine cover. Yeah. That was great. I think everyone had a copy. We were proud to represent our state, community colleges, you know, the whole thing. And so, yeah, really proud of it.
And I'm a graduate. I attended for 2 years. You got a lot about the history of Broadway when you were a student at Seattle Community College, because you were in the old Broadway High School. And once again, it was always brought up that this was Broadway High School.
And you could purely see that we were really just picking up on what they started of having the excellence at the school academically and so forth. And so what we were doing was just springboarding off of what they had started.
Broadway alumni could at least walk by Broadway and Pine and say that was my high school, and say it with pride, but not for long.
And then when they were going to tear it down, they were even more upset because, all right, you took it away from us, but now you're taking our building away. And it was not in the greatest shape. I can understand why the students at Central would want a new building.
And I didn't want to see him tear it down.
Well, that was our school. That was our legacy, and they were tearing it down. But at the time, they had a brand new school for North and South community colleges. So, of course, we must have brand new school for Central.
What's left from Broadway High?
And what's left is just the performance hall.
Seattle Central's Broadway Performance Hall.
We reduplicated the front of the old high school. All of these sandstone were taken down off the front of the old building, saved and preserved, and then reinstalled on the front of the Broadway Performance Hall. Originally, this was a big, huge H-shaped building. When the college tore it down, we saved this part. So the part that you're looking at used to be the study hall, the gym, and locker rooms.
We're inside the performance hall now, speaking with Stuart Olds, class valedictorian in 1942.
Well, this is the old Broadway High School study hall and auditorium. It's been redone for better use as an auditorium, and of course it's no longer used as a study hall.
This mural, painted by Eustace Ziegler in 1932, was also preserved. It's located in the foyer of the performance hall now. Other mementos from Broadway High fill the theater lobby. The 700-pound master clock from the principal's office. A rare Asian vase given to the school in 1908. Convergent Winds, a painting created by noted artist Kenneth Callahan, who attended the school in 1924. 2 photos. They were presented to Broadway High in 1916 by renowned Northwest photographer Edward S. Curtis. And this clock is a recreation of that iconic clock that prominently hung in the halls of Broadway High School for decades.
You, of course, are aware of the fountain that sits out in front of the school.
Ah, yes, the famous fountain from Broadway High.
It was immediately directly out of the main door of Broadway High School on Broadway. I'm sure it's still there. Yeah.
Still here. Oh, the stories this fountain could tell.
They had it disconnected for quite some time, but it ran for a lot of years, and we used to put a number of fellows on top of that just to show who's in charge, so to speak.
The great honor was to be set on the fountain, which finally occurred to me, and I was very proud of having been taken out and set on the fountain.
There's no building, there's no Broadway High anymore, and yet
have this feeling?
You know, I think that has something to do probably with their place in history, because it's interesting, as you know, Seattle being a metropolitan city, a fairly good-sized city, but in some instances that little group kind of maintain a small town mentality about doing things, because my understanding, a lot of them weren't very rich, so they had to invent their own fun, you know, and just having the ethnic breakdown there too. You know, you had white graduates, you had black graduates, you had Asian graduates, and they commingled and they did stuff. You know, they didn't let obstacles stand in the way. And it's like a lot of things, you know, once you graduate from an institution, the more you think about it, the more nostalgic you become.
They really were the best of times for so many, and good times for businesses in the area, back then and now. In part, thanks to Broadway High.
They were saying that if you were to drop a pin in the corner of Broadway in John and go out a mile, it was by far, and still I think is, the highest density area in the city of Seattle.
Ken Bowers owns Charlie's Restaurant on Broadway. The building was built 100 years ago.
It struck me that if Broadway High had never been built, you know, maybe this whole area would have been a little different.
There's absolutely no question.
Walk into Charlie's, you'll see that first high school in Seattle staring at you.
Obviously, where we place that particular picture is kind of a focal point of our entire restaurant. When people come in the front door, they'll always ask, "Oh, where's that?" And then we start saying, "Well, it's now the Broadway Performing Arts." He says, "Oh my God, it is!"
Going back all those years, there's nothing like it.
Come on, you're going back to your youth and seeing old friends and what's happened with so-and-so and what are you doing now, and primarily, how's your health?
I'm kind of glad that I grew up at that time, because those times will never repeat themselves.
And sadly, there's something else that will never repeat.
No, this will be the last reunion.
Last reunion.
With everyone getting up there in years, the alumni board decided this reunion would be the last.
I hate to see this end because it's been a wonderful run.
How was it seeing everyone?
Oh, it's nice. I'm sorry I'm going to miss it. I thought I could make my 100 here, but I guess they're not going to have any more. That's too bad. You know, it was fun getting together with the old folks.
And as much as sad as it sounds, but nevertheless, all good things have to come to an end sometime.
But the one thing that will keep happening for many years to come are the scholarships for the students at Seattle Central College, thanks to the Broadway Alumni Association.
This is from the Alumni Foundation. It's for another $15,000.
On behalf of the college, I want to thank you for this, for future generations. This is my third time since I've been president that I've had a chance to attend your luncheon, and I always look forward to these. I'm just trying to think, when I talk to students, how can I tell them about the greatest generation, about what is it like to be altruistic, what is it like to think about the future, what is it like to do this kind of planning and savings that you do, to let them know that they're not immortal, that most of them are 18 or 19, and what are you going to do in the next 30 years, the next 40 years? What are you going to do to contribute to society to continue on its path of greatness? But again, as the president of Seattle Central, thank you for your gift that keeps on giving. Thank you for thinking about the future, and thank you for thinking about our students. Thank you.
Thanks to the generosity of the Broadway Alumni Association, their legacy lives on through scholarships. They're truly transforming students' lives.
Elise Hagel is a proud recipient of one of those scholarships. Elise is grateful to the Broadway High alumni, and she's making them proud.
Upon completion of my AAS degree, I enrolled in the Bachelor of Applied Behavioral Science program here, and I'm excited to say that I will graduate in June and that I have a GPA of a 3.98.
Yay, indeed.
I just want to say thank you, right? I'm looking at you,
Yeah.
but I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, and also on behalf of my daughter. because, you know, she's 5 years old, and I know that I can always tell her, you can do anything it is that you ever put your mind to. You know, people believe in us. There are resources available for us, you know, so to be able to know that every day I go to school, it's for a reason, you know, and somebody believes in me, I just appreciate it from the bottom of my heart.
Broadway High.
Broadway High.
And that's their legacy, really.
That is their legacy. It's a legacy of giving. It's a legacy of sharing resources. It's a legacy of living in a time in our history where people had to do without, where they had to make sacrifices, and where they had to make their own fun.
Why is telling this story about Broadway High School important to you?
Because we need to have the history of the area, of the times, of the importance of education.
So our study of old Broadway High is essential to making, let's imagine the city as a musical instrument. If you're going to touch it, one of the strings in that is going to be Broadway High, and a very important one. It's going to resonate, and you want to hear it and you want to learn about it.
It leaves a good feeling. I think that's why the alums are so loyal. It's a certain good feeling. Hail Broadway, hail.
Okay.
Should I clear my throat? And
do I have to?
Yeah. I can state the lyrics for you without the word, but tuneful, I can't hold a tune anymore.
Yeah, I know they sing it, but I don't know it.
Hail Broadway, hail.
Alma mater, hail.
We'll give our all to thee, orange and the black.
From Broadway's halls sounds a call afar.
In defeat or victory, it's hail, Broadway, hail.
You nailed it, Joel.